The morning air hung heavy over Palawan Passage. Dawn light filtered through scattered clouds. Vice Admiral Takayo Karita stood on the bridge of his flagship Otago. His binoculars swept the horizon one final time. Another periscope sighting had just come in. The third since sunrise broke across the Philippine waters. Karita felt familiar irritation rising in his chest. These phantom submarines were becoming a constant distraction. His lookouts jumped at shadows in every wave. They created panic where none should exist. The admiral lowered his field glasses. He turned toward his chief of staff with visible annoyance. The words that followed were captured by Lieutenant Commander Ishiguro Nobuo. This surviving bridge officer would later testify to American investigators. His account became part of the strategic bombing survey records. Those lookouts see submarines everywhere. They spread unnecessary fear throughout the ship. 23 minutes after these dismissive words, the impossible happened. 4 torpedo tracks sliced through the water. They came from USS Darter hidden beneath the surface. The weapons found their mark with devastating precision. Otago's hull split open like torn paper. Explosions ripped through the heavy cruiser's compartments. Oil-slicked water rushed in through massive tears in the metal. The admiral who had dismissed submarine threats now struggled in the ocean. He watched his command disappear beneath the waves. 18 minutes was all it took for the flagship to vanish. Karita was experiencing something Japanese naval doctrine declared impossible. American submarines had just begun dismantling the most powerful fleet Japan had assembled since Midway. Before sunset painted the sky red, 3 heavy cruisers would rest on the ocean floor. Just 2 American submarines had achieved this destruction. The mathematics of maritime warfare were being rewritten in the Pacific. Torpedo wakes traced new equations across thousands of miles of ocean. Yet as their empire slowly suffocated from shipping losses, Japanese leaders clung to impossible beliefs. They refused to accept that American submarines were methodically destroying over 5 million tons of vessels. This story reveals institutional arrogance at its most dangerous. Flawed doctrine blinded military leadership to existential threats. Even as those threats systematically dismantled their nation's ability to continue fighting, Japanese officials maintained their denial. The roots of this submarine blindness reached back to the 1920s. During those peacetime years, the Imperial Japanese Navy crafted its doctrine for the coming American war. Strategy sessions at Tokyo's Naval War College perfected this vision through countless exercises. They envisioned a climactic surface engagement somewhere in the western Pacific waters. This would be their 20th-century Tsushima. Japanese superiority in night combat and torpedo tactics would crush the American fleet. Submarines played only supporting roles in this grand design. Japanese submarines would scout for the battle fleet. They would whittle down American forces during their Pacific crossing. Warships were their exclusive targets. Merchant vessels received no consideration whatsoever. This doctrine became formally codified during the 1930s. They called it the strategy of attrition and decisive battle. Every aspect of submarine development flowed from this concept. Training programs reflected these priorities exclusively. Captain Takatani Toshikazu commanded submarine I-8 throughout the war. His 1962 memoir revealed the depth of this doctrinal commitment. Our instructors taught us that merchant ship attacks were beneath honor. Those torpedoes should be saved for worthy warship targets. The American focus on commerce destruction confirmed their inferior grasp of naval strategy. Japanese experience seemed to validate this doctrinal blindness. During early 1942, their forces swept across the Pacific with stunning success. Japanese submarines achieved minimal results against Allied merchant shipping during this period. I-boats prowled American coastal waters with limited effect. They searched Australian shipping lanes for targets that rarely appeared. Indian Ocean patrols yielded similarly disappointing results. They sank only handfuls of merchant vessels while hunting for the warships that never materialized. Japanese naval leadership drew obvious conclusions from these results. If their superior submarines couldn't significantly damage merchant shipping, inferior American boats certainly posed no serious threat. Statistics seemed to support this confident assessment. By June 1942, Japanese submarines had destroyed only 98 merchant vessels. Total tonnage reached approximately 420,000 tons after 6 months of warfare. This averaged just 70,000 tons monthly from 64 operational submarines. If Japan's supposedly superior submarine force achieved such modest results, how could American submarines pose any meaningful threat? Japanese intelligence rated American boats as technically inferior. This made the threat assessment seem even more reasonable. American submarine successes began almost immediately after Pearl Harbor's attack. But Japanese naval intelligence systematically dismissed or underestimated these losses. USS Gudgeon achieved the first confirmed kill on January 27, 1942. She sank the 5,410-ton freighter, ID-73, in enemy waters. Japanese records attributed this loss to mine damage. This pattern of misattribution continued throughout the entire war. Commander Fujimori Yasuo served in naval intelligence during this period. His post-war interrogations revealed the systematic nature of this self-deception. Rigid formulas governed their loss analysis procedures. Ships that disappeared without witnesses were classified as marine casualties. Survivors reporting explosions meant probable mine strikes. Only specific reports of submarine sightings or torpedo tracks warranted submarine attack classifications. This systematic undercounting was compounded by inter-service competition. The Japanese Army operated extensive shipping fleets independently. They rarely shared loss reports with naval authorities. When Army transports vanished, Navy statistics often ignored them completely. USS Pickerel sank the 6,783-ton Army transport Surugamaru on April 7, 1943. Navy loss statistics didn't record this sinking until after the war ended. By December 1942, reality differed dramatically from official recognition. American submarines had actually sunk 139 Japanese vessels, totaling 580,000 tons. Japanese naval intelligence acknowledged only 67 ships, representing 230,000 tons, lost to submarine action. The gap between truth and official records was widening into a dangerous chasm. The year 1943 marked a fundamental transformation. American submarine warfare evolved from harassment to systematic destruction. Technical problems that had plagued American torpedoes finally received solutions. New fleet submarines entered service with improved capabilities. Enhanced radar systems provided better detection ranges. Longer operational ranges allowed deeper penetration into enemy waters. Greater torpedo capacity meant more weapons per patrol. Most critically, American code breakers were reading Japanese convoy routes in real time. Intelligence flowed directly to submarine commanders in the field. Results became immediate and devastating beyond Japanese comprehension. January 1943 alone saw 35 Japanese vessels destroyed. Total tonnage reached 150,000 tons in a single month. By June, monthly losses exceeded 250,000 tons consistently. Yet Japanese naval headquarters continued reporting submarine losses as negligible. Operational requirements supposedly remained unaffected by these mounting destructions. The disconnect between battlefield reality and official recognition became tragically clear through convoy operations. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka Taisuke commanded convoy escorts throughout this period. His detailed diary survived the war's destruction. March 15, 1943, entries reveal the growing crisis. 8 vessels departed Palau in his convoy. Only 3 ships reached Rabaul safely. Headquarters recorded the operation as successful, with minimal losses to unknown causes. May 2, 1943, brought another devastating example. 7 ships left Surabaya for Manila. 2 vessels completed the journey. Official reports blamed marine casualties on severe weather conditions. No severe weather had occurred during the voyage period. August 20, 1943, demonstrated the pattern's continuation. 12 ships departed Singapore for Japanese ports. 4 vessels reached their destinations safely. The official summary mentioned sporadic losses to various causes. Convoy operations were proceeding satisfactorily according to headquarters assessment. The Japanese Navy's secret intelligence summary for September 1943 was declassified decades after the war. It acknowledged total merchant losses of 172,000 tons for that month. Post-war analysis confirmed actual losses reached 263,000 tons. Over 200,000 tons had been claimed by submarine attacks alone. By early 1944, Japan faced a shipping crisis that threatened imperial survival. The numbers were stark and completely undeniable. Yet Japanese leadership performed remarkable statistical gymnastics to avoid confronting this reality. Japan entered the war controlling approximately 6.3 million tons of merchant shipping capacity. By January 1944, new construction and captured vessels had added 3.2 million tons. Despite these additions, the merchant fleet had shrunk to 4.8 million tons. Simple mathematics revealed the devastating truth. Japan had lost 4.7 million tons of shipping in just 2 years. The Imperial Navy's official assessment attributed only 1.2 million tons to enemy submarine action. Captain Azushi Oi worked in the Naval General Staff's logistics section during this period. His post-war testimony revealed the institutional mindset clearly. They knew ships were disappearing at alarming rates. They simply refused to acknowledge submarines as the primary destruction cause. Institutional psychology made it impossible to admit enemy success with a strategy they had dismissed as worthless. The Japanese Navy's doctrine had created a cognitive prison. Having declared commerce warfare both ineffective and dishonorable, acknowledging its devastating success meant admitting fundamental judgment errors. Instead, losses were attributed to an ever-expanding catalog of alternative explanations. Marine accidents topped the list. Mines received frequent blame. Aircraft attacks were commonly cited. Surface raiders got occasional mention. Weather damage was regularly invoked. Anything except submarine action received consideration. June 1944 introduced new horrors to Japanese shipping lanes. American wolfpack tactics emerged with devastating effectiveness. Coordinated groups of 3 or 4 submarines began operating together. They concentrated their attacks on convoys with unprecedented results. Japanese forces had never developed effective submarine tactics themselves. They were completely unprepared for this tactical evolution. Convoy High 71 departed Singapore on August 10, 1944. Its destination was Japan, with critical supplies of oil, rubber, and tin. The convoy consisted of 12 merchant vessels protected by 6 destroyers. This represented powerful escort strength by Japanese standards. What followed became one of the war's most devastating convoy battles. Between August 17 and 19, 1944, American submarines struck repeatedly. USS Rasher, Spadefish, Redfish, and Bluefish coordinated their attacks with deadly precision. The slaughter exceeded all previous convoy battles. Over 8,500 Japanese personnel died in less than 24 hours. The 8,500-ton transport Teiamaru went down with 4,155 troops aboard. the 11th E-600-ton Taihoku Maru sank carrying 2,665 soldiers to their deaths. 7 ships totaling over 40,000 tons were completely destroyed, yet the Japanese Navy's official report on High 71 minimized this disaster. The convoy had encountered enemy submarine activity. Several vessels were lost during the engagement. Escort operations were partially successful in delivering remaining ships to their destinations. Commander Hara Tamichi ranked among Japan's most skilled destroyer captains. He participated in numerous convoy battles throughout the war. His later writings revealed persistent frustration with headquarters responses. He reported the true scale of submarine attacks repeatedly. His reports were consistently edited by headquarters staff. They could not accept that American submarines had achieved this level of effectiveness. Japan's most critical vulnerability centered on oil supplies. The conquered Netherlands East Indies produced abundant petroleum resources, but this oil was worthless without tankers to transport it to Japan. American submarines made tankers their highest priority targets. The results proved catastrophic for Japanese war efforts. Japan started the war with 578,000 tons of tanker capacity. Desperate construction efforts peaked this capacity at 873,000 tons during 1943. But by early 1945, tanker tonnage had fallen to just 266,148 tons. This represented less than half the original starting capacity. The mathematics of fuel starvation were absolutely inexorable, yet Japanese planning continued assuming tanker losses would remain manageable throughout the war. Captain Shiraishi Kazutaka commanded the tanker Nippon Maru during this period. His diary described the growing reality with stark clarity. Every voyage represented Russian roulette for crews and cargo. Ships sailed independently because headquarters insisted tankers were too fast for submarine interception. This assumption was complete fantasy, according to operational experience. He had been attacked 4 separate times during his service. Survival depended entirely on luck rather than tactics or speed. Shiraishi's luck ran out on January 14, 1944. USS Nautilus put 3 torpedoes into Nippon Maru off Saipan. The 9,175-ton tanker sank carrying 2,000 tons of desperately needed aviation gasoline. Japanese records listed the cause as probable mine damage. Tanker attrition accelerated dramatically throughout 1944. October alone saw American submarines sink 23 tankers totaling 178,000 tons. The Japanese Navy's war diary acknowledged increased tanker losses to various causes. Operations planning continued assuming normal fuel availability for future missions. By late 1944, Japan attempted implementing a proper convoy system. This effort proved too little and far too late. The Grand Escort Command, established in November 1943, had received inadequate resources and limited authority. Japanese anti-submarine warfare remained primitive compared to Allied standards throughout the war. Captain Matsuyama Mitsuharu commanded escort vessels during this desperate period. He described the hopeless tactical situation his forces faced. Japanese escorts lacked adequate radar systems entirely. Sonar equipment was insufficient for effective submarine detection. Depth charge supplies were constantly inadequate. Communication between escort vessels was ineffective. American submarines attacked at night on the surface using radar advantages. Japanese escorts couldn't see targets that could see them clearly. They were blind men fighting invisible ghosts. Statistics told the story of systematic Japanese failure. During 1944, American submarines sank 603 Japanese vessels, totaling 2.7 million tons. Japanese anti-submarine forces claimed only 18 American submarines destroyed during the same period. Actual American losses numbered 19 submarines. This was remarkably close to Japanese claims, but this represented less than 10% of the American submarine force operating in Pacific waters. The exchange ratio proved devastating for Japanese interests. Japan lost 141 tons of shipping for every ton of American submarine destroyed. No nation could sustain such losses and continue fighting effectively. Even as Japan's maritime lifeline collapsed completely, senior leadership maintained denial through increasingly creative reality interpretations. Imperial General Headquarters liaison conferences coordinated Army and Navy strategy throughout the war. These meetings became exercises in mutual delusion. The transcript of the October 6, 1944 liaison conference was discovered in burned military archives after Japan's surrender. It revealed the institutional depth of denial. Army Chief of Staff General Umezu Yoshizero demanded explanations for critical supply shortages affecting operations. Navy Chief of Staff Admiral Oikawa Koshiro responded with characteristic evasion. Temporary disruptions in shipping schedules were occurring due to various factors. Weather conditions were cited along with port congestion issues. Sporadic enemy action received minimal mention. The situation would stabilize with improved coordination, according to his assessment. At that precise moment, American submarines were sinking Japanese ships at rates exceeding 300,000 tons monthly. Sporadic enemy action had become the leading cause of death for Japanese merchant mariners. While official reports maintained comfortable fictions, individual accounts revealed the mounting truth. Thousands of Japanese merchant mariners and naval personnel experienced submarine attacks firsthand. Their stories, collected systematically after the war, painted pictures of mounting terror on Japan's sea lanes. Merchant Captain Yoshida Mitsuo survived 4 separate submarine attacks during his service. His 1955 published account described the psychological impact on crews. By 1944, every departure felt like receiving a death sentence. Crews knew submarines waited everywhere along their routes. The Navy instructed them to sail independently at high speeds. This strategy amounted to suicide according to operational experience. Captains begged repeatedly for escort protection. They pleaded for air cover during vulnerable passages. Naval authorities insisted submarines represented only minor threats to properly handled vessels. Radio operator Tanaka Kenji served on 6 different vessels throughout the war period. 5 of these ships were sunk by submarine attacks. His testimony revealed the scale of individual tragedy. After his 3rd sinking, he reported to headquarters that submarine attacks were constant threats. An officer dismissed his concerns as exaggeration. He had simply been unlucky in his assignments. Unlucky 5 separate times, according to official assessment. The most controversial submarine attack involved the passenger vessel Awa Maru. USS Queenfish torpedoed her on April 1, 1945. This 11,639-ton vessel had received safe passage guarantees from the United States government. She was carrying Red Cross supplies to Allied prisoner of war camps. Poor visibility conditions led Queenfish's commander to mistake her for a destroyer. Of 2,004 passengers and crew members aboard, only 1 person survived. Sasaki Hiroshi was an engineer who provided testimony about the incident. The sinking violated international agreements and resulted in the submarine commander's court-martial for negligence. He was found guilty only of minor charges, despite the tragedy. The submarine campaign's impact extended far beyond shipping statistics alone. By 1944, Japanese industry was dying from resource starvation. Numbers were catastrophic, yet still officially minimized by authorities. Japan's steel production depended entirely on iron ore imports from China and Malaya. During 1943, imports totaled 4.3 million tons of essential ore. By 1944, despite controlling identical territories, imports fell to just 2.1 million tons. Steel production peaked at 7.8 million tons during 1943. By 1945, production had collapsed to just 0.8 million tons. The missing ore lay scattered across the Pacific Ocean floor. Aluminum production faced identical collapse patterns. Bauxite imports from the Netherlands East Indies fell from 750,000 tons in 1943 to 280,000 tons during 1944. Aluminum production plummeted accordingly from 151,000 tons in 1943 to 151,000 tons in 1944. By 1945, production reached only 7,000 tons annually. This represented a 95% decline, directly attributable to submarine interdiction of shipping routes. Engineer Takahashi Sankichi worked at the Yokohama shipyard throughout this period. He described the cascading industrial failures affecting all production. Raw materials became sporadic in their arrival. Then they stopped arriving entirely. Workers remained available along with manufacturing facilities. Nothing existed to build with anymore. Management insisted materials were currently in transit. Workers knew these materials rested on the ocean floor. Perhaps nowhere was submarine impact more decisive, yet more systematically denied, than in the destruction of Japanese air power. This destruction occurred not through aerial combat, but through fuel starvation. Commander Arakawa Masatake served as Air Staff Officer of the 1st Air Fleet. His post-war account documented the complete collapse of operational capabilities. By October 1944, Japan possessed 3,000 trained pilots and 2,000 operational aircraft. Available fuel allowed perhaps 200 hours of total flight operations. Not 200 hours per pilot. 200 hours total for the entire force. The submarine campaign had created cascading failures throughout the system. Tankers couldn't deliver aviation gasoline to operational bases. Without fuel, pilots couldn't maintain training standards. Without adequate training, available aircraft became useless weapons platforms. Yet Tokyo continued issuing operational orders, assuming normal fuel supply levels. November 24, 1944, marked the first B-29 raid on Tokyo, launched from Mariana Island bases. Of 111 bombers attacking the capital, Japanese fighters managed to intercept only 17. This failure stemmed not from aircraft shortages or pilot availability. Lack of aviation fuel grounded the majority of defensive fighters. Fuel that submarines had sent to Pacific Ocean depths thousands of miles from Tokyo. American submarine technological superiority grew consistently throughout the entire war. Radar systems provided the most decisive operational advantages. By 1944, every American submarine carried SJ surface search radar equipment. This allowed target detection at night beyond visual range capabilities. Japanese escort vessels remained largely radar blind throughout the conflict. Lieutenant Commander Yamada Taiyo commanded the destroyer Shigure during convoy operations. He described the impossible tactical situation facing Japanese forces. American submarines could detect Japanese vessels when Japanese forces couldn't see them. Submarines tracked convoys from beyond horizon distances. Night attacks came from surface positions using speed and radar to evade blind Japanese responses. Japanese forces were fighting completely invisible enemies. The Japanese Navy possessed radar technology but couldn't deploy it effectively. Component shortages caused by submarine interdiction of raw materials limited production capabilities. By late 1944, only 30% of Japanese escorts carried any radar equipment. Most units received primitive sets, with ranges under 5 miles. American SJ radar could detect surface targets at 15-mile distances. This technological gap produced increasingly one-sided tactical encounters. USS Batfish demonstrated American superiority during February 1945. She sank 3 Japanese submarines within 76 hours of operations. RO-55, RO-112, and RO-113 were all detected by radar before they detected Batfish's presence. The submarine-induced fuel crisis contributed directly to Japan's adoption of kamikaze tactics. Insufficient fuel prevented proper pilot training programs. Military leadership chose using minimally trained pilots for one-way missions. These required only enough skill to take off and aim at enemy ships. Vice Admiral Onishi Takejiro became known as the father of the kamikaze program. He privately acknowledged the connection between fuel shortages and tactical desperation. His chief of staff, Captain Inoguchi Rikihei, recorded Onishi's revealing words. Available fuel allowed one mission per aircraft. They could either waste it on inadequate training programs or use it for final attack missions against enemy targets. The submarines had made this choice for Japanese leadership. The first organized kamikaze attacks occurred on October 25, 1944. These missions used pilots averaging only 40 hours of flight training. Before submarine campaigns strangled fuel supplies, minimum combat training required 300 hours of preparation. Submarines had indirectly created the desperation that produced the kamikaze phenomenon. As 1945 began, Japan retained only 2.1 million tons of merchant shipping capacity. This represented less than one-third of pre-war tonnage levels. Available capacity fell below minimum requirements to sustain the home islands. American submarines were destroying ships faster than Japan could construct replacements. Official planning continued assuming shipping would somehow recover to sustainable levels. The Fundamental Policy for Future War Guidance received approval from the Imperial Conference on January 20, 1945. This document allocated shipping tonnage that no longer existed for operations that could never occur. The plan assumed 3.5 million tons of shipping availability for future military operations. Actual tonnage stood at 2.1 million tons and continued falling daily. By March 1945, the submarine noose had tightened to complete strangulation. Japan's remaining merchant ships huddled in harbors, afraid to venture into submarine-infested waters. The maritime nation that had conquered the Pacific could no longer safely navigate its own coastal areas. The final demonstration of American maritime supremacy came with Operation Starvation. B-29 aerial mining of Japanese home waters began March 27, 1945. While this represented air operations rather than submarine warfare, its success depended on submarines having first destroyed Japan's anti-mining capabilities. Japanese minesweepers were critically short of fuel due to submarine attacks on tanker fleets. These vessels could barely maintain operations. Specialized equipment needed for magnetic and acoustic mine clearance hadn't arrived from Germany. Submarines had intercepted and sunk the ships carrying this critical technology. The Japanese Navy could only watch helplessly as B-29s systematically closed their remaining operational ports. Admiral Nomura Naokuni bore responsibility for mine warfare operations. His testimony revealed complete helplessness. Japanese forces knew exactly what mines the Americans were deploying in their waters. They understood precisely how to sweep these weapons effectively. They lacked sufficient fuel to send minesweepers to operational areas. Equipment shortages prevented clearing sophisticated mine types. Both shortages traced directly back to submarine attacks on supply lines. The final major convoy from Singapore, designated High 88J, departed March 26, 1945. This convoy's fate illustrated Japan's complete inability to protect vital shipping routes. On March 29, 1945, USS Balao and USS Hammerhead worked with B-25 bombers from the 345th Bomb Group. Together, they decimated the entire convoy. Of 6 ships that began the journey, only 1 vessel reached Japanese ports safely. The massive 11,000-ton tanker Sarawak Maru went down carrying desperately needed oil supplies. After High 88J's destruction, no additional convoys attempted the Singapore-Japan route. The oil lifeline that had justified the entire war was permanently severed. Japan's remaining ships couldn't move from their harbors. Aircraft couldn't fly operational missions. Factories couldn't maintain production schedules. Submarines had achieved strategic victory without American forces setting foot on Japanese soil. When Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, American submarines had sunk 1,314 Japanese vessels, totaling 5.32 million tons. This represented 55% of all Japanese shipping losses during the entire war. Submarines achieved this destruction while losing only 52 boats during the conflict. The exchange ratio reached 25-1 in vessels and 100-1 in tonnage destroyed. Final statistics were compiled by the Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee known as JANAC. These figures were later confirmed through captured Japanese records. The scale of submarine achievement staggered comprehension. 5.32 million tons of merchant shipping lay on the ocean floor. 1,113 merchant vessels had been completely destroyed. 201 naval vessels were sunk, totaling 540,192 tons. Approximately 27,000 Japanese merchant mariners lost their lives. 52 American submarines were lost, with 355 submariners killed in action. Yet even facing complete defeat, full acknowledgement came slowly to Japanese leadership. The Japanese Navy's final wartime assessment was issued August 10, 1945. It attributed only 2.8 million tons of losses to submarine attacks. This represented barely half the actual destruction total. Only after surrender did Japanese leadership begin confronting submarine reality honestly. U.S. strategic bombing. Survey interrogations revealed consistent patterns of denial and rationalization. These patterns persisted even in complete defeat. Admiral Toyota Soemu served as the Navy's final commander-in-chief during the war. He testified in October 1945 about institutional blindness. Japanese leadership knew submarines were inflicting severe losses on shipping, but they couldn't reorganize entire strategic thinking during active warfare. Their doctrine, training, and equipment were all based on decisive battle concepts rather than commerce protection priorities. By the time they recognized the submarine threat's true magnitude, adaptation had become impossible. Captain Oya Tsushi served as the naval historian who compiled Japan's official war history. His assessment was more direct and critical. Japanese leadership had committed strategic suicide through willful blindness. Evidence was overwhelming by 1943 regarding submarine effectiveness. Acknowledging this evidence would have required admitting fundamental naval doctrine was completely wrong. The naval institution chose comfortable denial over necessary adaptation. Some Japanese officers had recognized the submarine threat during early war periods, but institutional hierarchy ignored their warnings completely. Commander Chihaya Masataka warned in 1942 that American submarine doctrine focused on commerce warfare rather than fleet engagements. His detailed report was filed without any corrective action. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka Yajichi submitted analysis in January 1943. He warned that American submarines would sink over 3 million tons by war's end unless countermeasures were immediately implemented. He was transferred to shore positions for defeatist thinking. His conservative estimate proved tragically accurate. Japanese naval leadership consistently underestimated American submarine capabilities while overestimating their own anti-submarine effectiveness. Japanese submarines were technically impressive by any standard. They could dive deeper and operate longer ranges than most contemporary designs. The I-400 class became the largest submarines built by any nation during the entire war. But impressive specifications didn't translate to operational effectiveness. Japanese submarines suffered from slow diving times during emergency situations. Radar systems were primitive compared to American equipment. Engines proved unreliable during extended operations. Most critically, misguided doctrine emphasized warship attacks over commerce raiding throughout the war. Meanwhile, Japanese anti-submarine capabilities remained primitively inadequate. Depth charges were set too shallow to reach American submarines operating below 300 feet. Sonar equipment lagged a full generation behind American standards. Commander Yasuda Takashi commanded anti-submarine operations from Truk during the critical period. His testimony revealed complete tactical inadequacy. Japanese forces were fighting modern submarines using tactics from 1918. They listened with hydrophones while Americans used radar for detection. Depth charges dropped at 100 feet, while submarines operated at 400-foot depths. Adaptation never occurred because it would require admitting technological inferiority. Beyond tonnage statistics lay immense human tragedy often overlooked. Approximately 27,000 Japanese merchant mariners died, representing casualty rates exceeding 15%. This exceeded many combat unit loss rates. These deaths went largely unrecognized by Japanese society. While kamikaze pilots received celebration as national heroes, merchant mariners who died in torpedo explosions remained invisible to public consciousness. Survivor Yamamoto Taro endured 3 separate submarine sinkings during his service. His written account revealed systematic institutional abandonment. Merchant mariners were considered expendable by naval authorities. The Navy insisted submarines posed no significant threats. Then authorities sent mariners to sea without adequate escort protection. When ships were sunk, survivors were blamed for poor seamanship. Complaints about dangers were met with questions about personal courage. Psychological trauma among survivors was severe but completely undocumented. Japan possessed no concept of combat stress affecting civilian personnel. Merchant mariners who refused sailing after multiple sinkings were branded as cowards by authorities. The submarine campaign triggered economic collapse that preceded military defeat. By early 1945, Japanese war production had fallen to 35% of peak capacity levels. This decline resulted not from bombing damage, but from material starvation caused by submarine interdiction. Economic cascade effects touched every aspect of Japanese civilian life. Rice rations fell as ships couldn't transport food from producing regions to population centers. Coal shortages forced power plant shutdowns. Hospitals ran out of essential medicines. By spring 1945, Japan faced widespread starvation. This resulted not from crop failures, but from complete inability to distribute existing food supplies. Economic Planning Board Director Suzuki Taichi testified about systemic collapse. Submarines destroyed Japan's economy more thoroughly than thousands of B-29 bombing raids could achieve. Bombing destroyed facilities that could be rebuilt with effort. Submarines destroyed the circulation system itself. An economy without functioning transportation becomes a lifeless corpse. American submarine commanders were often genuinely puzzled by Japanese failure to adapt tactically. Their patrol reports reveal consistent amazement at poor Japanese anti-submarine procedures. Commander Dudley Morton of USS Wahoo wrote in January 1943 about predictable Japanese responses. Escorts were ineffective and followed preset patterns regardless of actual submarine positions. They abandoned convoy protection to chase submarines in futile pursuits. Commander Richard O'Kane of USS Tang reported similar observations in 1944. Merchant vessels sailed independently without zigzagging maneuvers. These ships operated in broad daylight along predictable routes. Escorts used active sonar, continuously advertising their exact positions. Japanese forces still didn't understand that Americans attacked on surface positions during nighttime hours. Commander Eugene Fluckey of USS Barb became the war's most successful submarine commander by tonnage sunk. His testimony revealed continued amazement at Japanese tactical rigidity. American submariners expected Japanese forces to adapt and improve their methods. This adaptation never occurred throughout the entire conflict. In 1945, submarines were using identical tactics that had proven successful in 1942. Japanese forces died rather than change established doctrine. Japan possessed numerous opportunities to reduce submarine effectiveness, but failed to exploit any of them. German U-boat technology and proven tactics were available through Axis cooperation agreements. Tokyo largely ignored these offerings as irrelevant to Pacific warfare conditions. Germans offered advanced sonar designs proven in Atlantic operations. Radar detection equipment was available for transfer. Convoy tactics had been perfected through years of Atlantic warfare. Acoustic torpedoes designed specifically for anti-submarine warfare could have been provided. Japanese naval attachés in Berlin reported these technological offerings to Tokyo. Headquarters showed minimal interest in German expertise. Japanese pride prevented accepting that Germans might understand anti-submarine warfare better than they did. Commander Yokoi Toshiyuki served as naval attaché in Berlin throughout this period. He wrote about institutional arrogance blocking technological cooperation. Germans had fought submarines for 3 consecutive years. They offered hard-won expertise freely to their Japanese allies. Tokyo rejected most suggestions as inappropriate for Japanese operational conditions. The final accounting reveals numbers that stagger historical comprehension. Japan entered the war with dreams of vast Pacific empire. Submarines sank those imperial dreams ship by ship, ton by ton. By August 1945, Japan retained less merchant shipping than she possessed in 1868, when modernization efforts began. The 532 million tons sunk by submarines represented far more than just ships destroyed. This tonnage represented Japan's entire war-making capacity sent to the ocean floor. Millions of tons of oil were never refined into usable fuels. Iron ore never reached smelting facilities. Rice never reached hungry populations. Raw materials never transformed into finished weapons. These missing resources translated directly into complete military impotence. Battleships sat immobilized in harbors for lack of fuel. Aircraft remained grounded without aviation gasoline. Factories stood idle without raw materials. The industrial nation that had challenged America was reduced to pre-industrial transportation capabilities. Military historians have identified several factors contributing to Japan's systematic submarine denial. Doctrinal rigidity topped the list of institutional failures. The Japanese Navy's pre-war doctrine had become unquestionable dogma. Having declared commerce warfare both ineffective and dishonorable, acknowledging its devastating success required admitting fundamental strategic errors. Cultural factors compounded institutional problems significantly. The concept of face made acknowledging mistakes extremely difficult for leadership. Submarine threats had been dismissed during early war periods. Reversing these positions required admitting institutional failure. Institutional blindness prevented effective communication within the hierarchy. Junior officers who recognized growing threats couldn't communicate concerns effectively upward through the command structure. Senior officers who had dismissed submarine threats couldn't reverse positions without losing institutional authority. Technological arrogance created cognitive blindness to American advantages. Japanese belief in spiritual superiority over material factors prevented acknowledging American technological superiority. This included radar systems, code-breaking capabilities, and submarine design improvements. 60 years after the war ended, Japanese naval historian Captain Hara Tamichi delivered definitive judgment on institutional failure. Japan lost the war to submarines, but could never admit this defeat. Acknowledging submarine success meant acknowledging complete strategic failure. Leadership chose comfortable delusion over uncomfortable reality. That choice cost them their empire and nearly destroyed their nation. American naval historian Clay Blair concluded that no force in military history achieved more with proportionally fewer resources. American submarines in the Pacific comprised less than 2% of U.S. Navy personnel. They destroyed over 55% of Japanese shipping during the entire conflict. Success came not through overwhelming numbers, but through superior technology, training, and Japanese refusal to acknowledge their effectiveness. The last surviving Japanese naval officer to hold submarine command was Commander Hashimoto Mochitsura. He had commanded the submarine that sank USS Indianapolis. His reflection in 2000 revealed fundamental cultural misunderstanding. Japanese leadership never understood American submarine warfare because they never understood American strategic thinking. Americans fought an economic war, while Japanese fought for honor and glory. Americans targeted Japanese weakness in shipping dependency. Japanese ignored American success because it didn't match their concepts of proper naval warfare. The Japanese inability to acknowledge submarine effectiveness stands as history's premier example of institutional denial defeating institutional survival. Despite overwhelming evidence, clear statistical proof, and mounting operational disasters, Japanese leadership maintained their denial until the empire lay in complete ruins. Modern military institutions study Japan's submarine blindness as a warning against doctrinal rigidity. When institutional culture prevents acknowledging unwelcome realities, defeat becomes inevitable regardless of other factors. Submarines didn't defeat Japan entirely by themselves, but Japanese denial of submarine effectiveness ensured that defeat became total and absolute. Admiral R. Lee Burke served in Pacific operations and later became Chief of Naval Operations. His summary captured the essential tragedy. The Japanese Navy died from willful institutional blindness. They possessed excellent officers and brave sailors. Adequate resources were available for effective resistance. They lacked only institutional courage to admit fundamental errors. That single lack cost them everything they had fought to achieve. The story concludes where it began in Pacific waters. But now, instead of Vice Admiral Kurita dismissing Phantom submarines in October 1944, the final image shows Emperor Hirohito in August 1945. He stood in his Tokyo palace examining charts showing Japan's surviving merchant fleet. Less than 1.5 million tons remained from over 10 million tons controlled during 1942. The emperor asked his naval minister about this catastrophic shipping loss. Admiral Yonai Mitsumasa finally spoke complete truth after years of institutional denial. American submarines accomplished this destruction, Your Majesty. Japanese leadership could not believe their effectiveness until adaptation became impossible. They chose maintaining comfortable illusions rather than confronting operational reality. Submarines destroyed not just ships, but Japan's fundamental ability to wage modern war. The emperor nodded slowly in understanding. The war was ending in complete defeat. Submarines had achieved victory through systematic destruction. Japan had lost not just to American submarine technology. They had lost to their own institutional inability to believe what those submarines were systematically achieving. The final numbers were irrefutable and absolutely devastating. American submarines had destroyed over 5 million tons of Japanese shipping capacity. Japanese leadership could not believe this was happening, even as their empire strangled from supply shortages. They maintained institutional disbelief until the very end. By then, belief no longer mattered because ships, cargo, fuel, and empire itself lay scattered across the Pacific Ocean floor. The greatest American submarine victory wasn't measured in tonnage sunk alone. The psychological paralysis they inflicted proved equally decisive. Japanese leadership's inability to accept reality, even as it destroyed their fighting capacity, ensured submarine success beyond America's wildest strategic expectations. Japanese leadership could not believe American submarines were systematically sinking their empire into oblivion. That fundamental disbelief ensured submarines succeeded completely. The story of Japanese denial regarding American submarine effectiveness remains history's darkest reminder. Refusing to acknowledge unwelcome truths doesn't make those truths disappear or become less real. It only makes eventual defeat more certain and complete. 5 million tons of shipping resting on Pacific Ocean depths testified to truths Japan could never accept. Modern warfare rewards production capacity and technological superiority over spiritual determination and military tradition. Submarines had taught this lesson systematically. Ship by ship, ton by ton, they delivered instruction until no vessels remained to carry illusions of Japanese victory. Japanese leadership could not believe U.S. submarines had sunk over 5 million tons of their shipping capacity. That institutional disbelief became their empire's epitaph, written in the depths of the Pacific Ocean.